We are lighting the candle, a world that works. And I am Bill Correll, still and again. And I'm here with my podcast buddy Jan Jeremias, who I dearly love getting together with on a weekly or whenever it is basis. We just have a ball. There's a lot going on. And I'm really happy, to talk about things that are totally unrelated to the blood and guts physical world that we're experiencing, especially for this hour. And I'll tell you where I think um, I'd like to go today, and it has to do with truth, authenticity, love. What are the things that we want and need in the world, and how do we access those when it doesn't seem like we can find it anywhere? So, does that seem like a good place to get started, Jan?
Sure. Yeah.
So I'll speak for myself, and I'll tell you that lately I have been finding myself uh, in fewer conversations with people, either in person or on online, and doing a lot more task work around the house. Really enjoying just doing little detail things, working on my cars, uh, changing fuel filters, which on my Mercedes it's a project. It's not something like you just go out and unscrew a little wing nut off the top of an air cleaner and drop a new filter in. They actually have to pull some things apart, disassemble, whatever. And what's fun for me is that it's just engaging some of my low level training from 40 years ago. Um, and it's nice to be reconnected with that, and also doing simple little things like starting with fogged headlights on my cars, and then an hour later they look better than brand new. They are crystal clear, and I've gone through a process of giving them new purpose and new life. And I think that that's a metaphor that I want to use today a little bit. If you've got a car that's older than 10 years, you take a look at the headlight, you're probably going to see that it's pretty cloudy, and that does a few things. It changes the outlook on the world when you're driving around at night with your b- low beams or high beams on. You're only getting a certain percent of the light, directed at the target, the road in front of you, which allows you to see things clearly and perceive them a lot more closely to how they really are. And the fact of the matter is when they're cloudy and getting diffuse light, it doesn't go as far. It doesn't return brilliant objects back to you, and it's not real. So simply just by having a process of cleaning those headlight bodies, and making them crystal clear again. It's like cleaning your glasses a little bit, but this is more, in my opinion, it's along the lines of when you get a 15 or 20-year-old car. Many of you may not have ever owned those, but that's mostly what I own all the time. And you put a new windshield into it. It's like, holy guacamole, that's what's going on out there. It just makes life easier and less stressful, and all of that kind of stuff. So, what do we want to access? When do we want to access it? And what is the access to accessing?
Sorry, I muted myself because Tonka was barking. so, um, so one of the things that you said, Bill, is just that you're working on the car and that kind of, that crystal clear. And we always say, like, to me, any practice that you can do, which kind of gets you in touch with maybe the quieter, maybe the heart of yourself versus, the analytical thinking brain, which tends to be bombarded with chatter and distractions. We call that polishing, like polishing the heart in yoga. We say that all the time. Or cleaning the mirror, like of that, you fog that mirror with your breath, and then you take out a rag and you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to polish this glass. And, so that's the way I think of anything that we can do to kind of get in touch with that part of ourselves that maybe is a little bit quieter, maybe has the ability, it gives it a little perspective and a little bit more of a broader view. And when I got on today, I said I just got off a very heightened, sort of very meeting where three or four of us all together, but we were all sharing a lot of opinions and kind of thing. And so I felt a little bit like overloaded. And I used a practice which um I heard recently, and they said when you look outside, like, and so I'm looking out out my back door, which is full glass to my pond, and is like just noticing not exactly what you see, but how many shades of green you see. And so when you said, do you need to take a moment? That's exactly what I did. I was like, oh, like look at the green and don't look at the objects, and then kind of work your way in to see the objects. But it was that first reaction of kind of like, because to notice an object, the brain says, oh, okay, that's a red house. Oh, I know what a red house is. And then it kind of puts the two together and it's almost automatic. It's kind of like the brain says, okay, red house, and it puts it to the side. Where if you do something like take a broader perspective of, okay, green, and then trying to like discern, and then amongst that green, what do I see? It starts to bring the focus a little bit more from the outside or the periphery in. So that was what I did just now, 5 minutes ago, to kind of get into a space that was a little bit more, I want to say, just centered or
Yeah.
grounded.
Yeah. And what I love about what you said was even the red house. If you take a moment to notice the different shading of shadows, and maybe somebody's done some touch up, or maybe there's something where there's actually wood peeking through because it's been rained on so many times that there's actually a little bit of rot going on. There's all these little details that you can pick up that your mind gets, but you don't process any of that consciously. It's just like two-dimensional, like now that was whatever it was. And when you take the time to really drill down into the detail and really be present to what's actually all out there in the microscopic as opposed to the macroscopic, a really wonderful thing happens. And what that thing looks like sometimes is that you go from having a situation where you know something and it's part of your who you are, and to where you get on to another level of understanding something. And it's in the understanding that life really becomes fun, in my opinion. It's one of those things that happens when you notice that you've stopped paying attention to the world. The moment that you notice that you're not present, that you're not paying attention to the world, you're going to find out some amazing things about yourself. And I've just been kind of droning on here for a moment or two, but the whole idea of seeing details and suddenly discarding whatever your already knowing was about a certain thing and get yourself into the zone of understanding as opposed to knowing, that's where life is actually going on, in my opinion. The knowing isn't really all that, there's nothing to engage there. There's probably not a lot of emotion. You just know what you know. However, when you get something that sort of disrupts that, what you know, and you start getting into the, well, what's that all about? Now you're into the understanding part of life. And it's in the understanding, in my humble opinion, where you get related to other people, you get related to things, you get related to yourself in this moment right now, as opposed to what it was before.
Hmm. I mean, along that line, I've been listening to a lot of things. So my audio event this week is on the power of awe, and the more research I do on this whole idea of things that we find like awe, like awe striking,
Yeah.
like stuff that takes your breath away in whatever form that is, are those opportunities, like you just said, to kind of start to bring in maybe a little bit more understanding, maybe a little bit more. They talk about awe or beauty, and we can find that in, in the intricacies of how a car works, um, of looking at an amazing piece of art, going out and being in nature. I mean, there's opportunities for that kind of awe. And I think, to me, one of the beautiful things about that is it brings an element of, we are a, like, we are part of something much greater than just ourselves. And yet we are just, we are an ocean in one drop, and we are drop in the ocean kind of thing.
Right.
So this whole idea, and so I really love that. And I think that when we get to know, like, when we start to get our hands into something, whether, and that doesn't need to be working on a car. I mean, that could be cooking an amazing meal, or creating a beautiful piece of art, or writing something that's just where you sit and you pour yourself into it, whatever maybe it's maybe it's a chapter, or maybe it's a poem, or maybe it's just getting out in nature and truly experiencing it. So all of a sudden you start to look at the beauty really that is all around you. And it could be an amazing building. Like, it's not limited to being out in beautiful spaces. I mean, it could look, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I said, I've always loved bridges, like something about the architecture, and just looking at those wonders basically. And to me, like, automobiles are one, if you think about the whole invention, and, or planes. My father was an aerospace engineer, so planes hold something really, like, I still think that it's a miracle that something that heavy can fly, like, kind of thing.
It's magic.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I think if we look around the world like that, it's a lot. I think it's a key to a happier life, because I think that, yes, life can get very dark and heavy. And
Yeah.
so,
I just want to interject something there.
yeah, please.
If you realize that what you're calling life is your belief system, as it is, unchallenged by an adult who's got the ability to ask questions, but to feel challenged in life, like this is really hard with no way out, um, it really just is a this wonderful opportunity to, and the word wonder, as far as I'm concerned, is joined at the hip with awe. It's like, how is that possible, sort of thing. If you look at just pick up anything, just pick up, I don't care, maybe it's a fortune from a Chinese fortune cookie, and what you see on it is enthusiastic leadership gets you a promotion when you least expect it. I mean, and that's cool. And then there's lucky numbers on the back. And then there's, well, how about another fortune? And it tells you what.com to go to get another fortune. And the other thing that's kind of neat is just look at this paper, look at the printing. I wonder what the story is with these little blue lines up in the corners, and what other things can I like really generalize about this, and who thought this up? And wow, billions of these things get opened every day, and it's like, where can you go in terms of just further and further and further looking at something and making, sometimes you make assessments and judgments, and sometimes those assessments and judgments are correct and sometimes they're not, but you can always go through a process that you design yourself as a functioning human being, like with the adult capacities that you and I have, to take yourself from a place where you're not really liking it all that much. And that's not a terrible thing for you to not like it. That's all part of life. But if you want to transform that, and I don't mean just like gloss over it, if you want to transform that, then you can get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into asking questions about something until
Well,
until how it is disappears and it now becomes how is it, you know?
right. And I think that, how often do we do things. I said we look at a house and we kind of say, okay, red house. And it kind of gets banked into this kind of category. Well, my brain has seen red houses before, and this red house is the same as every other red house. And now it's banked in my brain, and know what it is. And it doesn't really need to do much. Where if you actually look at something like you said and start to discern, or I just, before I came on, I had a quick snack, I had a banana. So what if I sat down and I thought to myself, like, wow, a banana. Like, where did that come from? I wonder who picked it. I wonder where, like, I don't know on this label whether it says the country that it comes from. I know it's
Yeah.
organic. That I know. I know
Or at
that
least that's what you've been told.
that's what I've been told anyway. I hope it is. And but where did it come from? How did it get here? When exactly was it picked? I mean, I know when I got it in the store, but what brought it there? Like, who planted it? You know, like all this, like, oh my gosh, bananas. What kind of weather do they need to grow? Like, there's a
Mm,
thousand ways to sit there and think to myself, okay, that when I even thank whoever I want to thank for that banana, um, I'm thanking like the pickers and the growers, and I'm thanking the universe or whatever, if you want to label it God, for the weather elements to give me that banana. But it's a lot more than just taking a bite. And I guarantee you, once you start to look at it like that, it tastes different too, because all of a sudden there's this kind of richness to it. And I like the word richness. Like, there's like a savoring kind of quality versus I'm just going to eat this either for pure nourishment or because it's about time that I'm supposed to eat. Or if I don't eat it now, I'm going to feel draggy in an hour, but right now I feel fine. So becomes a lot more of a richer experience versus one that I just take for granted.
yeah. So I think there's two words there that you said. One is that you take something from being an action and you create an experience out of the moment. And in that experience, there's a the term richness has to do with um, how how deeply different something is from the mundane. And if you consider language, it's the same thing. When you read Shakespeare, it's a little bit different than reading the Peanuts comic strip, right? There's a lot of double entendres. There's a lot of things to take a moment to go deeply into. What's the language saying? How does it make me feel? What are my emotional responses? What are my sensual responses with my six senses? And I definitely call the unspoken receptors as being just as powerful as the other five senses. And in that, it's one of the ways that you and I non-verbally and without any facial expressions or anything can actually communicate with an animal that we've been with for a very long time. And it happens also, between partners in a marriage situation or best friends or something of that nature. But the whole idea of where is the richness in the mundane, because it's all mundane in a world that's not working. It's a pain in your ass, actually, and not in a good way. And so the long and the short of it is, how do you transform where there is the lack of beauty into beauty is present? And you and I are absolutely Merlin in that respect. It's not alchemy, it is real magic. It is transformation in terms of, give me a minute, I'm better now. Give me another minute, I'm terrific now. Give me a minute. What are we going to go conquer? So you get that these are not like linear, things that can happen. They are actually wormhole kinds of things where you're shifting the paradigm, and you're doing that in the power of your own linguistics and your own thinking and your own decision to understand as opposed to know.
Hmm. Yeah, I think to me, I look at it as, almost more base than that. to me, I look at it as, okay, right now I'm feeling very riled up. What in this moment is going to bring me back to ground or to center? Like that's yes. And that to me is that access point where literally I said, okay, give me 1 minute. Give me 1 minute. And so to me, it's very practical because it's something that I incorporate into my life throughout my day, all day, where I sit there and I, where I get pulled into things periodically, depending on my mood and depending on where I started from. And let's say how I like, whether I got a good night's sleep and I'm tired or I'm hangry because I like needed to eat. I was like, okay, well, in this, like in these next 30 seconds, what can I do to center and ground me? Because at the moment I need to like, I need to, not to be but to be practical, I need to get this done. Like I need to move on and get and move on, move into my day a little further. And so it becomes, yes, an element of understanding. And one is obviously looking at where I am, seeing where I'm starting from and recognizing that I'm a little anxious or agitated or whatever, or riled up. But the other part of me is like, okay, well, I don't have to live there. Just because that's my state at the moment doesn't mean I need to spend the rest of my day or the next 5 hours in that space. Like that's a choice I can make.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think that there's this opportunity that you and I have to always upgrade our language about how it is. And at some point, you're going to have things in your life that are not going to allow you to get grounded the way you've known it. They will not allow you to go back to anything because that anything is now destroyed. It's
Oh,
changed forever, you know?
absolutely, absolutely. And there are yeah, absolutely, and I just have to say I so agree with you. There are moments
Yeah.
in time when you are just caught off guard, where your breath catches and maybe you do something like I just said and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and that's okay too. But to me, that doesn't mean I don't try to access the tool. Try to do it anyway, or I try to incorporate that,
Right.
knowing that on some level it's probably helping me in some way, even though it might not be obvious to me, because at the moment it doesn't feel like it.
Sure.
And I have faith that somehow it's going to affect me on some sort of energetic, deeper level, which I may not be able to be aware of in my current state. And then maybe a little while goes by and I try it again. Or maybe not, like, but I do think that there are moments when we are just like like where you're, I don't know, it feels like you've been hit by a truck kind of thing, where, basically you're just the wind is really knocked out of you.
Yeah. The Brits have a way of they call it gobsmacked, you know?
Oh,
And to me, that kind of sounds like somebody hit you with 40 pounds of wet laundry in the face and knocked you off your feet. I mean, not in a small way, and in a way that actually engages all of your senses at one point where everything is going danger, danger. What the dickens is going on right now? And we get to a very young response to it. It's fear first, and then anxiety, and then all of those things mixed together. And we're not powerful and we're not able to function. And so the whole idea is how long do you want to stay in that state? Do you realize that you do have something to say about that? It's not necessarily like I'll be in this state till I'm not in this state anymore. Well, that's kind of like choosing to be in that state, you know? But what if you just stopped for a moment and used your interruption tools and your disruption tools? And it's like, I am processing this like it's totally bad. What if is it possible for me to recreate this moment, in my how it's affecting my being at the moment and see some positive ray of light that this is actually giving me a message from life or something that's powerful that once I understand it, not know it, but once I understand it, it will change me in my body. It will give me a felt shift, and I will now add it to what I know, but I have to go through the experiencing of understanding first.
One of the a few of the things you said, Bill, really kind of struck me. One was I do think there are experiences like that where in the moment, and it is a choice. And and I know that we've both been struck by loss over the past like year or 2 years,
Yeah.
where someone has passed. And I know at points, and sometimes saying the words, but not necessarily feeling it, and eventually realizing, well, reason I was grieving or I was in that sad place was because how much I loved that person. And would I have wanted the opposite? Like I never had the experience of knowing them. And so therefore, I never had the loss, and it's always like the exact reverse. Like I would rather have known them and loved them and been going through this now than
Yes.
never have had them in my life. And so for me, I know that that was a huge kind of aha. Yeah, I'm unhappy now or I'm sad now, but yet I wouldn't have given up any moment that I'd had with that person over my life, especially because it was my dad. So it was my entire, one of the people was my dad. So it was my entire life. So would I have given that up not to have him not be my dad so I wouldn't have gone through that? No. But I had to and maybe I said that phrase to me myself, like, I don't know, half a dozen, dozens of times before I actually could kind of own it and decide that, oh, okay, that's absolutely true. That
Yeah.
is so true for me. So that was, and I do think that there are points where, and I'm not saying you should live in a space of loss and grief or whatever emotion it is for the rest of your life, but there are points at which you're just not ready. And then hopefully for me, then I realized that I was ready and that I could still keep him all these different things. Like I could still keep him with me, even though he physically wasn't here. And, like all those different tools or things that I grasped onto, like dedicated times where I'd actually commit to thinking about him or writing about him or writing him a letter, like all these different things I did to kind of get through that. But there was this kind of point at which there was that shift, like that line where I said, okay. And it wasn't like in my head, I said, okay, now is enough and is enough. And I never I don't get sad anymore.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. But there is that point where I sat there and I said, okay, take a deep breath. And, you know, now it's time for you to sit with that loss and what it feels like and start to let it move through and all those different things. And I think that that is really valuable. And no matter where we are and what is happening in our life, is lately I've been focusing on, let's say, abundance and this whole idea of there's many different types of abundance. And could I get it to be a little bit more broad, or could I get it to be a little bit more spacious and to allow not to get so hyper focused on one area of my life, which I'm concentrating on, let's say, which is not abundant at the moment. So, could I shift it and realize where I do have abundance? So, I mean, if you think about loss, what is loss? Loss is the absence of connection with that person. It's the absence of having that person. Maybe it's the absence of love for you in some ways, or like that person being telling you they love them, that they love you or whatever. But maybe you can start to shift and find areas where you do have connection and where there is community and where you do have love.
Yep.
So you kind of realize that that's not all there is. Does that make sense?
It actually does, and, as usual, I will have something to say about that,
Of
and,
course you do.
we are thrown from wanting to shift where we are to where we wanna be and name it, okay? And we don't understand where we are, uh, like, where are we shifting from in the first place? And we've shut down all of the possibilities of just shifting it somewhere else in the broader sense, not like to a place or to a state of mind or to a set of feelings or something of that nature. How about we just shift this feeling? How about we just shift it to something different, something maybe even new, something, you know, unexpected. And then again, creating an experience to actually understand and learn as opposed to, you know, just making it go away. Because
Oh,
in my opinion, when we have things that we don't like going on in our life, they tend to repeat.
oh,
And until you give yourself the space to not know what it is and to not understand it and then potentially get curious about it, you're not adding anything, to your life's experiences that are powerful for you, I'm saying.
mhm. Well, I mean, that was the whole reason I loved yoga so much because I got to start feeling things without labeling them. But, I would have a feeling, know where I felt it in my body, not even been able to label it. And then getting to the point where maybe I didn't necessarily need to label it. It was like, it was just energy. I mean, that's really all it was. It was energy. And
Yes.
not having to put a label on it, which sometimes, in that way, and I love the English language or I love language, but in that way, sometimes there is no way to express it. Like, there are no words. When you lose someone, there's no words. That's why it's so hard when somebody has lost somebody to find words to say, because you feel like no matter what you say, it's inadequate.
Right.
It's like I can't really like your heart goes on. Sometimes in that way, touch is so much better. Like you give the person a hug because that kind of sums up your feelings where words would fall short. And so for me, getting in touch with my body or getting outside in nature was a way for me to start to kind of experience, and I say sit or be with, even though I'm not physically sitting, maybe, but sit with those emotions and feeling without having to put a label on it. And then maybe after time, when I got to process it on a deeper level, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, this is how I feel. It was almost like this epiphany of like, oh my gosh, I've been trying to bring words to this. And finally, this seems, and not to say that wouldn't change, but at that moment I was like, oh, this is what I'm feeling. And then it was a way for me to move through it because I mean, physically I was processing it, moving it through my body because I felt like, emotions to me have a home in your body. So there was a way for me to access it and kind of hopefully get it to go, process through.
Yep.
But it was also a way for me to sit and not escape from it, which I think is one of the most valid points you said, because that's what ends up happening. The more we push something away, the more it kind of sits there and puts up its hand right in front of you and says, okay, here I am. Here I am. You haven't done anything with me and I'm still here. And the universe will provide you ways to keep seeing it. It
Yeah.
always does. It does. It just like, you're worried about something and how much like that's, sort of like having a feed, right? And those are the things you're fed. Like you have a feed on your
Right.
social media page. And if you are feeling angry about something or some situation and you like it, that's all it feeds you. Or like, or posts about that. Well, that we're the same. We're no different. If that's, the universe will provide you examples if that's what you're living.
Well, it is a perfect metaphor, in my humble opinion. I actually think it goes further than that, where on the Facebook feed, you can actually tell it whether you want more of this or less of this, you know?
Exactly. Exactly.
We do that in our own processing of information on a daily basis anyway. We numb
Absolutely.
our mind to seeing what's really in front of us so that we can move on to the thing we think is important beyond this moment. And if you think about, um, I don't know who said it, but somebody said that your life is a string of a million moments of which you will remember a thousand.
Mm, I love
And
that.
yeah, it's like the ones that you pick and choose, are these ones that bring you joy? Are these ones that empower you? are these ones that take you to a dark place. And the whole notion of being curious, I love it. I really do, because I think everyone can be curious. This is a notion, that some of us forgot. Curiosity is how we take ground in our lives. It's how we choose to have our knowledge increase by being willing to not know. And there's also this very fundamental way of being that we have, and I think Freud and others talked about it a lot. That people will do almost anything, and they'll kill people that they love to be right. And that's a powerful thing to engage with. Are you being right? Are you being right about something that you're actually not correct about? What in this moment is not allowing you to move forward? Might be a decision you made and forgot.
And I do I really do spend a lot of time lately thinking about like that whole idea of what we're fed, like what we expose ourselves to.
Yeah.
And I think because I think we're if we're in a space like that, we're more apt to look at these things. So if I'm constantly in a state or feeding myself information that's out there that's constantly negative, that's constantly, like that newsreel that's being perpetuated, that which is very fear-based or divisionary, you know, the dividedness, the differences between people. That is what I'm going to feel. And that's what I'm going to kind of look for in my world. And I don't know if in that world there's a lot of space for kind of looking at ourselves and saying, or looking even at the choices we make and realizing that they were choices. Because I think in that world, we end up placing blame on a lot of other people outside of ourselves and the way that this is life is, and this is the way society is, and whatever, yada, yada, yada. And then I think if we start to look at things in a little bit more, or look for the positivity or what we feed ourselves, I think we're willing to kind of recognize that, okay, this was a mistake I made. I made this choice. I'm glad I made that choice. This is what I learned from it. But it wasn't a wise choice. Like I acted before I had all the information. I had a feeling, but I didn't listen to that feeling. Um, we start to kind of look at our lives a little differently. And I think that that's what I'd like to offer people is this idea of like, kind of like what, I think that when you're anxious, which predominantly a good majority of the people in this kind of and globally now are anxious and depressed,
Yeah.
I think it's very and lonely. So you have that, like those three, which are kind of almost like a self-perpetuating loop kind of thing. It's like it's very hard to look at yourself and real and not be the victim.
Yeah,
And
there's a thrownness to being the victim, isn't there? Like,
yeah,
the first place to stop is, "Why is this happening to me? I don't deserve it?"
right. And I think that if you start to look at life in a little bit different picture, I didn't get this book, but I'm really curious. I heard about it recently and I really want I think I'm going to invest in it. It was written by the creators of Upworthy,
Yep.
um, called Good People Stories from the Best of Humanity.
That sounds wonderful.
And it's all these different stories of people that had people do unbelievable kind things to them, or people who influenced them. So supposedly, like there's a whole chapter that people submitted stories about, like that one teacher that saved their life, or saved or changed their life. I shouldn't say saved, but changed their
Right.
life. And then there's a section. I mean, they read a few of those stories. The authors they contributed to stories on their own and why they made it into a hard copy book as opposed to just because they have Upworthy, online and on social media, and why they felt it necessary to create a hard copy of this, like an actual book of this. But in it, some of the stories that they read and shared were just like amazing, from simple acts of kindness from a stranger, where that had influenced people's lives in the most amazing ways. And and their whole focus in this whole podcast that I listened to in this whole interview was really about like what we feed ourselves and what we expose ourselves to,
Yeah.
because there's opportunity for both. And I feel like if we want to even, I don't know, to me lately, I'm like, if I want to look at my life in an objective way, good and bad, like we all make mistakes, it's all learning. Um, you know, I've got to be in a better headspace, because otherwise, what ends up happening is I end up going down the negative and the blame. So whether I'm blaming myself or I'm blaming somebody else for my problems, like, I mean, it's all about blame. It becomes a little bit less about what can I learn from this and what could I gain and what would I do different. It becomes much more like labeling, like, oh gosh, I'm not good at this, or, the world is out to get me, kind of attitude. Sorry.
So I love it because it's just basic human being stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like I said, when something seems beyond you, you're going to revert to a very young response to it. It's going to be like that of a 2 or 3 year old. It's not going to be like a 40 or 50-year old, because a 40 or 50-year old learns a new sentence to ask, as opposed to, why is this happening to me? What is this? And what's going on? What am I responding to? Is there anything there? Like a series of voir dire questions so that you can drill down to grabbing a corner of something and having some power with it. I think that's what life is all about is, we could spend a lot of our day, and many people do, unfortunately, being in that space of, why is this happening to me? What the heck is going on with the world? What's going on with me? What's going on with it, the system, And if you get to the point where you've decided you've had enough suffering, you might want to just introduce a new set of challenges so you can get to a choice point. And sometimes choosing to dwell where you are that's uncomfortable for a minute or two longer allows it to go away much more quickly. And I really, want people to consider for a moment in investigating, getting interested in, what if I stop complaining about what's going on and I start asking a really fundamental question about what is going on? What is it about what I think is going on right now that is upsetting me? You know? And not necessarily, like you said, not necessarily to get to a language name. So you've named it, because immediately after you have, a lot of times it's like, well, no, it's not that.
Well, either that or it's like the red house, it's like you bank it,
And
and there's no need for any more processing than that because you labeled it.
you put it away, you glossed over it, and nothing new learned, no difference made.
And I think that when you start to do that, to kind of take it, with that step and one step further, is you start to see patterns in your life where the same thing does repeat itself, where
Amen.
you start to sit there and say, okay, well, this is not the first time that this is happening, so what about my life isn't, and I don't want to say in a negative way, but what in my life could I change to finally, or to hold, and sometimes it's never final because there's always another layer to me, there's always a deeper layer, like we think we've sort of like handled something, or I want to say process something, and then all of a sudden something happens and you're like, I guess not.
And the key to the thing is there was never ever anything there for you to process or handle. You
Right.
just processed your feelings for a moment and you got to a place where it's no longer bugging you.
Right, exactly, and then maybe
That's
something
the
else.
key. I mean, those that's the key to the kingdom right there is, ain't nothing going on here. There's just me making this stuff up. I've got some stronger language to use there, but It's just me being in this moment, choosing this response to the world. If you can choose that response, can you choose something else?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember, I think I've shared before. I remember going, I have a lot of social anxiety in groups. And I remember going in to something I really didn't want to go. I really didn't want to go. And I kind of forced myself to go. And I had a miserable time because I didn't want to go and I didn't really want to be there. And it was like I went in with these colored glasses on, like these filters on. And so I went in and I didn't have a good time. And then the next time I was going to something, and I remember going in, and it was with the same exact group of people, same exact people were there. And I remember going in and thinking to myself, I'm going to go in this time and I'm going to be open. Like whatever happens, happens. I'm just going to be open. And I remember I had such a good time. And then I remember afterwards kind of looking back at the situation and thinking to myself, okay, what was different between those two experiences? And I just remembered like this, and I wrote it down in my journal and I just wrote, you were like, I was different because the attitude I went in the first one, which was very closed and very negative and very much like, I'm going to have a bad time. Why am I bother going? I would much rather stay home. And then the second one, I was just open saying, okay, I'm just going to meet people. I'll see who's here. We'll have some chit chat or whatever, and really having a great time. And the only thing that was different was me. And I just remember looking at that thinking, oh, and then I think I realized how much like my experience differed by how I was, what I brought in, and sort of how I labeled it, and what ideas I had or feelings I had before I walked in the room or into the space. And so, yeah, so I just remember that because I remember coming home and thinking to myself, okay, what's different? And saying, me.
See, that is so brilliant in its simplicity, and people will have to believe that first. They're not gonna just accept what you're saying, Jan, okay, on face value. They're going to say, "But no, it can't be me, and here's the reason why, and well, you're different," or but the point
Well,
is
it's
that
like and you also have to be ready, Bill. Like, I have a friend who has a business, and when I tell you, she is constantly looking for employees.
yep,
Like, she is like, every time I speak to her and I say, "Oh, I'm really busy, but I'm short-staffed because so and so left or so and so left." Or to the extent, like, I don't think I ever speak to her where she's not saying that sentence, and I've known her for 10 years. And to me, there's one common denominator as to why she's losing people.
right,
That's her. But I'm not in a position to tell her that. And she has not yet been able to see it. But I
right,
have another friend, and the three of us are friends. And my friend will say to me, there's one common denominator here. And that's her. It's her business. Like there's one common denominator, but she isn't ready or she doesn't want to see it. And I
yeah,
can't as much as and so it is something that somebody will have to experience of like, just notice like the next time, not with any plan in mind, just notice the next time. Let's say you don't want to go into something or you're going into a situation and how you feel and what the result is. And then another time, maybe same people. I always say family functions are the greatest things because usually a lot of times they're the same characters. And how they show up might be obviously is going to be different because they're not going to be the same because none of us are. But basically, you have the same, you have the same cast of characters that come in. And
yes,
notice when you have your attitude or whatever have attitude you have, or however you're feeling like that day, whether when you come in and you come in a different space, just notice what happens.
right,
And then just start to kind of keep those in mind as you navigate. Like, okay, well, I was really excited when I went into this and look, I had a great time. Or I was feeling, like I didn't really want to go, or angry, or upset, or distracted. And I felt like it was a waste of time, or I wasn't really happy I went, or vice versa. and just notice.
Yeah,
See if you see a difference. I'm not telling anybody to do anything or that this is how they should do it. I'm just offering out there. Would your experience be different? You know, like
I think the matter, is one for investigating. Your
exactly.
mileage may and will vary wildly depending on how easy it is for you to put your state of mind aside for a moment to choose taking action for yourself. And many people will have to be shown how to do that. It's not something that they're just automatically going to hear the language and then be able to do it. And it's a skill, and it requires some technology, and it requires some effort, and it requires a decision at the beginning. I'm going to do what it takes to become good at this. And it's probably not going to be real comfortable for me for a while. And you and I are addicted to comfort. So, let the games begin. Would we trade the notion that we are comfortable, because we're rarely in that state? It's just the one we're constantly striving to get to, that we would trade that for the ability to take where we are, experience it, add it to our life's uh, library, and then move back into being powerful, whatever that is.
Yeah, I think it's, I think it's something a combination of different people that different. I've listened to so many people over the past few weeks, podcasts and interviews that it's a combination of. I think it's the difference between going through life and living a full life.
Yep.
Actually, truly living a full life in its gamut. I mean, like, it's experiencing everything. And I remember that was one of the when I first started I know, I mean, sometimes I feel like I talk about yoga a lot, but I guess because it was such a monumental part of my growth and my kind of transformative journey.
Yes.
Um, but I remember sitting there and thinking to myself, like getting to yoga and practicing and feeling like I was a mess. Like I was a mess, I felt like. But then I realized I was just truly experiencing all the things I tended to kind of like keep in a little box, well, good and bad, for so many years. Like I was just trying to get by, like, not get by, but kind of navigate without any emotions at all. Like, nothing. It was just kind of like, okay, here I am. I'm going to get to the head of the class if I just stay within these parameters and don't let anything kind of deter me from my path. And then remembering that, I remember thinking to myself, like, the things that I had that were joyful that brought me to tears became a lot more obvious, just like the things that were sad brought me to tears so much more easily. And I thought to myself in the beginning, like, what's happening to me? That's why I felt like I was a mess because, I mean, all of a sudden, like, I'd hear sad things and I would start to cry, or something would happen for somebody and I would be so overjoyed. And I was like, I felt like, oh my gosh, what's happening to me? Because, it wasn't a way that I had grown up, like kind of thing, or been exposed to. And
Right.
then all of a sudden I realized, like, oh my gosh, I'm really experiencing life. Like, this is life in all its entirety and all its fullness. And I think we have to start recognizing, and that's why I love what Susan David says. Like, emotions are, as she calls them, their guideposts or just information or data as to like
Yep.
how we are navigating, but they're not good or bad. Like getting away from trying to label everything as like this is a good categorizing, and this is a good emotion and this is a bad emotion. Okay, well, this is telling you something. What's it telling you? And so that's like I felt like yoga was my first kind of entree into that because all of a sudden I was living life as opposed to kind of like trying to skate. I want to say skate or ski because without feeling anything on either end.
Right. Right. And that's what devastating life's experiences can do to you. That there's actually a deficit in the will to experience life. Um, there's a lot of attention put into how am I feeling today, and taking your temperature, and coming up with a game plan to survive until tomorrow. And Nobody wants that for you. No one wants that for you. And I really appreciate, that we can have this conversation truthfully and authentically and out in the open. And then follow that up by asking a question like, how do you and I take better care of each other, so that we don't feel alone in those moments and we don't get to the point where we really don't care any longer?
I was listening to something, and the person was saying that they have a chatter buddy. So when the chatter inside their head gets to be too loud,
Yep.
they have somebody they call to say, like, okay, this is what's going on in my head, like, and talk about it too. Like, am I being like, am I ruminating? I'm overly worried about this. Like, to kind of do a check-in, which says, like, okay, get a little perspective here.
Yes.
And they have like a chatter buddy, and they have a few people in their circle that they have, like, oh, okay, I'm feeling like this, I can call so and so because I need
Right.
to have a little bit of, like, I need to pause for a moment and think to myself, am I analyzing, am I getting too obsessed with this, am I, is this chatter in my head is far too loud at the moment? And so having a network of people who you feel close enough
Yeah.
to be able to do that. And I'm not belittling therapy or anything by any means, because I think that sometimes having someone objective who has no vested interest in what you said is a really good thing to have. And I've had
Yes.
gone into therapy and out of therapy periodically for probably a good majority of my life. And it is very nice to be able to talk to somebody who doesn't know the characters, who you get to vent and sort of share with, kind of thing. But there is this idea of, okay, do I have a group of people that I could call that would listen to me right now
Yep.
and would be open? And if I wanted, and maybe they obviously, I think you've said this a number of times, Bill, as have I, of like saying, okay, well, do you want to vent, or do you want my opinion, or do you want me to share with you what I'm thinking about this, but asking if they want that first versus offering it,
Yes.
like, yeah. But just having someone that you can call, I think, is really important.
Yeah. So
And
I love it. We kicked off talking about how do we take where we are that's possibly dull and lifeless and not feeling all that much like a rewarding space to hang out. And then through some sort of a process that is invented to create love, not go back to love, but create love newly, because it's going to be a creation for you to shift into a state that you want to be in. That state that you want to be in is a target that no longer exists. It's an experience that you've had at some point in your life. And there's a technology that basically says, I want you to think about where you were the happiest you've ever been in your entire life. Keep your eyes closed now. And I want you to like feel the feelings. I want, what temperature was it? Was the sun on your face? Were you, smelling the surf and salt and low tide in your nostrils, and was there a breeze, and all this kind of stuff. And now, have you got that? What we're going to do the next time you're feeling less than your best is we're going to have you recreate that state in your head, and that's what we're going to use is to kind of like to ground you and tag you to coming back from being disempowered on the road and the journey to empowerment. Well, there were some people that could do that, but the preponderance of people who didn't have the time, weren't interested in, trying something until it worked, because, they've tried hundreds of things before and none of those worked. And so when it comes right back down to it, if two people, two crackpots like Jan and me, I'm the bull goose loony in that category, but the point is that if we tell you you can create a bread trail that takes you to a place that's different than where you are right now, be willing and open to that just being a place where things are clear, where there's now nothing there for a moment, where you can breathe and find an opportunity to hear yourself think and to shut the bees in your head off for a minute or two, you know? Be willing to put the work into that. And that's a skill that will save your life. It will give you life. And like you said, Jan, it will give you the quality of life that you seek. And one that includes, yes, these emotions don't feel good and they're not bad. They're, rocks are rocks, trees are trees, emotions are emotions, and this is one, you
Mm,
know? Well,
absolutely, and I love that, and I I think it's an invitation, and I like the word invitation to play because
yes.
I think it reminds me of that whole, like, sort of wonder, awe, like, it's an invitation to play in that playground for a little while.
Yeah.
It's like, "Okay, well, could I play here for a little while?" It doesn't mean that you're committing to play there for the rest of your life. you know it doesn't mean like you're moving in and you're gonna pop a tent and put down stakes and whatever, since I camped for many years.
Yes.
um, but possibly you sit there and say, okay, could I play here a little while and see how that feels, and then maybe the next day comes and something else happens and you're like, okay, well, could I play here a little while and see how that feels.
Agreed.
And then maybe it gets, you want to play in that area for a longer period of time, and that's great too. But it becomes an opportunity to, that whole idea explore versus, maybe with a little bit more flexibility and freedom versus being so rigid. Because I think that
Mm,
that's the way we all feel. We feel like in general, everything always has rules and guidelines and everything, which always feel very rigid. Like there's no flow, there's no fluidity to that at all.
right.
And not to say you don't need like like I think, you and I have talked about having a set of tools and kind of figuring out what tools work. It's kind of like, okay, what tools are in my toolbox that are going to help me, kind of thing, and kind of saying, okay, I use a little bit of this and I use a little bit of that and I use a little bit of that, is going to help me. But realizing that, we offer all these out to people, and you got to figure out what's in your toolbox. I, was speaking to somebody who overcame addiction, um, and substance addiction, alcohol and drugs. And he was saying that he knows what worked for him. And he said, but I don't feel comfortable being an addiction counselor or guiding other people. He said, because I use a lot of different things and what this person needs might be different. I can
Right.
tell them what tools I used. And so you share what works for you. And I love sharing what works for me. And then I guess what we ask of you out there in the audience is that you sit there and try it and say, oh, okay, well, that worked, or that worked for today. Okay, great. You know, now you have it as maybe something that you grasp onto again and see if it works again or whatever. Or maybe you tweak it a little bit to your liking so that all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I like sitting in quiet for a little while, but what I'd really like better is if I sat outside.
Right.
Great. Great. Like alter it so that it best fits into your lifestyle, what you need to do. I have a friend who sits and meditates basically, or just sits in quiet or whatever at her son's soccer games. Like she's in one place, she has to be there, not in a negative way, but she wants to be there. She has to be there. And she doesn't close her eyes because she wants to watch him, but she just kind of sits in this very peaceful, very present state in a place where she's not really asking herself to find out and carve out more time because she has so little time already, is where she has to be there anyway. So she might as well take full advantage of that time that she already has to give, so that she has two benefits basically. He feels like she's there and she is watching him and she can chime in, but she's also being present for herself at the same time.
I love it. And I think that's probably a really good spot for us to put a bow on it.
I love that, Bill. It's a wrap.
You got it. Absolutely. Any closing thoughts or words to our kind audience?
I guess my one quote is if you like feel like you do not have anybody to share your chatter with, reach out to Bill or myself because we'll get on with you, or you can send us a message and you can just, share with us. It's obviously private and confidential and we won't share it with anybody else. There are a lot of people out there who really do want to help and listen. And I know asking for help sometimes is not, or a lot of the time is not an easy thing by any means, but there are people out there who want to.
Yeah. Try it. You'll like it. All righty. Well, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. And once again, I've had a marvelous conversation with you, my good friend, Jan Jeremias. So I'm going to ask you all to take this space that we've created right now, and in kind of a thankful way, reach out to people in your life, either text, phone, or email, and just send them a message and let them know that the world works because they're there and that you're always there for them if they ever need you. So bye bye.
Bye bye, everybody.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.